Hard facts for the moment, Delano, relatively thin on the ground. What we know for certain, as you say, a Russian reconnaissance plane was hit with 15 people on board. Now, according to Moscow, the direct cause of this incident was friendly fire coming from Syrian forces in Latakia, in that northwest part of Syria. But as you say, they pointed the finger directly at Israel here, saying they hold them entirely responsible because there were 4 Israeli jets in the area at the time, and they say Israel didn't give them enough time to move that Russian jet out of the way before those strikes happened, hence this hit. Now, how plausible is that Russian version of events? Well, what we do know is that Israel does carry out sorties in Syria relatively often, some 200 we know in the last year and a half, largely targeting Iran and forces that want to move military weapons towards Hezbollah in Lebanon. And while normally after it carries out sorties in Syria, Israel remains completely silent after incidents, what's interesting today is that we have heard unusually from the Israeli military. They've issued a statement, among other points, while they've insisted that they were out of Syrian territory at the time that this attack took place, they've also said they've expressed sorrow over the death of these 15 Russians, which could be seen as some kind of tacit responsibility that they do have a role of sorts to play in this incident. The other key factor to mention here is communication, because if this Russian version of events is to be believed, Delano, clearly a long-standing and what has been for a long time an effective mode of communication has broken down. We've known since Russia became involved in the war in Syria in 2015, there have been these hotlines in place so that the various foreign powers who are involved over Syrian airspace can tell each other when their planes are moving around to avoid these kind of accidental strikes taking place. We think, for example, you remember earlier on this year when the United States led an attack on Syria because of chemical weapons. It informed its allies and it informed Russia to make sure that there were no hits like this. Clearly, it suggests that kind of communication has broken down, and the real question is what kind of impact will that have now with all of those forces still operating over Syria and continuing to be invested in the region.
We'll talk more about that impact, but specifically with regards to the regional consequences and relations between Russia and Israel from now on.
Yeah, that's right. First of all, on that front, it is pretty embarrassing for the Israeli military and for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Putin Netanyahu, known to get on actually pretty well, despite the fact that Iran, of course, is a key enemy of Israel, and Russia has worked with Iran quite a lot during this campaign in Syria. But the two are known to get on pretty well. And you can see today, I know particularly from the Israeli side, quite a determined attempt to build relations, to improve relations with Moscow after this attack. Once again, I draw your attention to that unusual Israeli statement from today, where while they did accuse their usual suspects like Iran and Hezbollah of being involved, they have also expressed some regret for what's happened. And reading between the lines, I would say that does suggest that they do acknowledge that something in their own communication system has gone awry here. Also important to note that the Israelis have said that their political and military figures are in constant touch with Russians today, and that Netanyahu will be phoning Putin himself later on today to try and smooth over as much of these issues as possible. So really trying to avert a bigger diplomatic fallout here. I imagine this will be quite different to when we saw a Turkish jet being shot down by Israelis earlier on during this war. That's something that really had a longer-term diplomatic regional fallout. We're hoping, the hope here from both from Tel Aviv and from Moscow is that that can be minimized.